It's just this sort of takes over your brain. And that's kind of how alcohol was for me. It was just always, always on the back of my mind, whether I could drink, when I could drink, knowing I needed to quit drinking. How was I going to do this? How could I live my life without alcohol? And I lived that way for 20 years.
Katie Herzog has written a most interesting book, Drink Yourself Sober. It's about how she reined in a drinking problem that had dogged her for decades. Using the drug naltrexone, which is FDA approved for opioid use disorder, she removed the pleasurable feedback that drinking had provided. Gradually, over time, she simply stopped drinking. She is now sober and shares her journey to help others. Katie, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. All right, so my story, if you want to go way far back, my story starts when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and I had my first taste of alcohol. And for me, it was sort of love at first sight, one of those situations. And I drank. I drank when I was a teenager. I drank a lot in college. I drank after college. When all my friends started getting jobs and getting married and having kids and sort of gradually, naturally leaving the bar scene, I was still parked firmly at the bar every day at opening. And this affected my life in many different ways. It made it, as you can probably imagine, made it hard to accomplish kind of those milestones in life, like having a career, serious relationships, getting a home, things like that. So I struggled with kind of growing up, and I didn't really think it was much of a problem in my 20s and early 30s because I was surrounded by people who were just like me. I was a barfly, I was a party girl, and so in my community, it was sort of normal to spend most of your time drinking. I now know that that's not actually normal. There are most people actually don't drink at all. There was a survey came out just this week that less than or around half of Americans don't drink at all, and of the ones that do, most of them don't have a problem. But I was in this sort of elite category of drinkers. I was like the top 10% of American drinkers, and so I lived like that for a long time. And I did gradually sort of get my stuff together. I did get a career. I started working as a journalist. I did get into a serious relationship. I got married. I bought a house. I did do those things. But alcohol was always sort of the defining factor in my life. It was the first thing I thought about in the morning and the last thing I thought about before I went to bed. And for people who've never been addicted, I sort of I think an easy way to describe it is like if you remember what it was like to have a crush on somebody or new love, right? When you have these kind of all-consuming, obsessive feelings about someone. The person is all you can think about, right? Whether that's good for you or bad for you, it just this sort of takes over your brain. And that's kind of how alcohol was for me. It was just always, always on the back of my mind, whether I could drink, when I could drink, knowing I needed to quit drinking. How was I going to do this? How could I live my life without alcohol? And I lived that way for 20 years. And during COVID, my drinking accelerated. My wife is a nurse, and so she was gone for long periods of the day helping people, and I was at home not helping people, and I drank more. So I drank in secret. I didn't want anybody to know about this. This was my dirty little secret. And eventually, it got to the point where I was waking up every day at 3 o'clock in the morning, just night sweats, uh, just immense amount of stress, you know, knowing that I was killing myself. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. I looked terrible. I felt terrible. My head sort of shook, all the time, like a bobblehead on a car dash. And so I was having the physical effects of alcohol, but also the mental effects. Just extreme agitation, anxiety, stress. I was depressed, of course, and I knew something needed to change. And I'd been to therapy in the past. I'd done AA in the past, and I'd done other programs like SMART recovery and moderation management, but nothing worked. And I read books about about recovery. I listened to podcasts. Yeah, I did those things, and it never worked. It never the voice in my head that told me I needed to keep drinking just never was never able to quiet. And during COVID, after about 2 years into my COVID bender, um, I decided to try something else. So I had read several years before, I had read an article in The Atlantic about a drug called naltrexone, and the drug is an opioid antagonist, so it's an opioid blocker. And what that means is that it blocks the euphoric effects of chemicals, of substances, of behaviors that trigger your opioid system. So these are things like alcohol. And I decided to try this drug. So there's different ways to take naltrexone. Some people take it daily just to sort of calm the cravings they get from alcohol, and that can work well from people. For some people, there's also a shot, a long-acting form called Vivitrol. So you take the shot, it's a big shot in the butt, and then it's in your body for a month. And I tried to do it a different way. So what I did was called the Sinclair Method, and it's this very specific targeted use of naltrexone. So you take it before you drink. And that's what really appealed to me about this protocol because it didn't require abstinence. And that was the thing that I was always unable to achieve was long-term abstinence from alcohol. And this was a way of continuing to drink, continuing the behavior that I absolutely hated, but absolutely loved at the same time. But doing it in a way that would hopefully, if it worked, lead to a reduced pleasure from alcohol. And that's exactly what happened. So I started taking this pill. I took it every time that I drank. I would take it an hour before. That's about how long it takes to metabolize in the body. And then I would drink like normal. And over about 7 to 8 months, I stopped wanting to drink. It just did nothing for me. It because I wasn't getting this euphoric high from this endorphin rush. When I drank, it no longer had any appeal, which is why my book is called Drink Your Way Sober because that's literally what I did. So I did this in secret. I didn't do it with any kind of support network. I just did it on my own, and it worked for me. And then so I quit drinking. I no longer take the pill, I take the drug because I no longer drink. Some people take it because they just want to drink moderately, but I really wanted to quit. So that's what I did. And then after about a year, I told my wife, and she was she was surprised to find that I had a drinking problem, and surprised to find that I solved my drinking problem.
How do you hide something like that?
It's not that hard. I think people who aren't alcoholics always have that question, but I have now interviewed and spoken to many, many problem drinkers, and often there are some stories that seem to be universal in the alcoholic however you pronounce that word, and one of them is secret drinking. It's incredibly common, and for me, I was doing it when my wife was at work, so we live, um, we live an hour ferry ride away from where she works, so this wasn't the sort of situation where she was gonna just, like, pop back in the house for lunch. I knew where she was gonna be, I knew when she was gonna be home, and
What
so I
about the
was
evening, though? Did you sober up for the evening? I mean, wouldn't it become apparent?
So I would quit drinking about when she was getting off, I would quit drinking. So I drank during the day. I wasn't drinking at night. I was only drinking during the day. So I would start at like noon, sometimes earlier. I would drink until 5, 6 p.m. I would stop drinking. I would take a shower, clean the house. She never noticed. She was completely surprised. And I would fall asleep on the couch while we were watching TV every night. I kind of do that anyway. So no big surprise there. And it was just if I never drank around her, so if she had had some context for seeing me drunk, I think it would have been more obvious, but for her, as far as she knew, I had been, sober for most of our relationship. So she didn't know.
Mm. After you became sober, did your behavior change much? Because, like, if
And
you
we're
look.
still married. That's probably the most surprising part of all of this. She didn't.
Oh, I'm
Sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
Um, one of the things, programs like AA look at are changing your behavior, making amends, all that type
Yeah.
of thing. Have you seen a behavioral change in yourself when you were drinking versus not drinking?
Yes, immense behavioral changes, and some of that is small stuff, right? So, when I was drinking heavily, when I was in sort of the throes of alcoholism, Small things were difficult. Eating was difficult. I didn't wanna eat. I wanted to drink. I didn't wanna waste calories on food, not because I was worried about my weight, but just because food had no appeal to me whatsoever. I saw food as just something to line my stomach so that it would absorb alcohol so I was less likely to get sick, right? So small things like that, like changing a light bulb that went out in my refrigerator, things like that became just immensely difficult. So my life has changed in all sorts of small ways. Like, well, now when I get a bill in the mail, I open the bill and I pay it. Um, my work is better. I exercise now. I eat better. Since this happened, I bought a house. The simple act of getting my paperwork together to get a loan would have been impossible while I was drinking. So all that kind of stuff was just, it was like when I got sober, it was like I had sort of unlocked a life hack almost, because everyday tasks are so much easier. But also just in terms of my character as a person, I had a massive secret that I kept from everybody in my life for years, and I don't have that anymore. So that burden has lifted. I think I'm a better spouse, I'm a better daughter, I'm a better worker for sure. My work has really improved since I quit drinking, because I'm not distracted all the time. I'm not always thinking about how what I would really prefer to be doing is drinking or actively drinking while I'm supposed to be doing other stuff. And I think one of the criticisms that people in 12-step programs will have for what I did is that it doesn't require a deep moral inventory, right? It doesn't require amends. You can do that stuff. You're absolutely welcome to do that stuff. And I think there's a lot of value in programs like AA and other 12-step programs, because they do force people to confront the worst parts of themselves. They force you to reckon what you have done to other people. I also think those things are a lot easier to do if you don't have the monkey of addiction on your back. So I think for people who wanna do, sort of use naltrexone as a tool, but go through the principles of AA, also get the community aspects of AA, that people can sort of cobble together their own programs. I think that's fine. For me, you know, I think there's a common misunderstanding about people who suffer from addiction, that we all have something at the root of our addiction, like trauma or anxiety or depression. We're trying to hide from something. There's a deeper reason for our drinking. For me, that's just not the case. I drank because I liked drinking. I thought it was fun. I got a pleasurable effect from it. It stopped being fun at some point, but for me, it was quite simply, there's certain risk factors for alcohol use disorder. One of them, trauma is one of them. I don't have that in my background, but drinking early, family history, I do have that. Drinking early, so starting at a young age, and drinking often. So those 3 risk factors, I had 3 of those 4 risk factors. And, you know, I didn't need trauma to develop an addiction. I developed an addiction because of repeated exposure to alcohol over the course of years. And so, there are certainly people that I hurt when I was drinking, but I think the act of becoming a sober person, or even getting control over your drinking, if you don't actually become sober, but you wanna get control over your drinking, I think that in itself is a sort of amends, because I won't hurt people the way that I did while I was drinking. There are also people that I hurt when I was drinking who I will never make amends to. They don't want me in their lives. They don't, and so my way of making amends to people I've hurt is I have removed myself from their lives, and I will never demand their presence in my life again. And people in AA clearly recognize that the step about making amends is making amends where it won't harm the person further. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize. Once you have hurt somebody, showing back up 20 years later to say, "Whoops, shouldn't have done that," it might make you feel better, but it's not necessarily going to make the people that you hurt feel better.
Yeah, one of the things you mention in your book is that alcohol deadens emotions. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I find that fascinating. I've seen this in my own life. I actually dated somebody for a while who just drank a little too much, and his emotional life, as a result, was limited. And I
Mhm.
really think it was related to the alcohol.
Yeah, it depends on the person. I think it deadens emotions for some people, and it heightens emotions at other times. 4 drinks in, you might feel extremely emotional, but it does over the long term. I mean, my sort of inner life, I would say, uh, alcohol made it hard to deal with things as they came up. So I would deal with things by drinking more because I had no coping mechanisms. I started drinking at a very young age. My coping mechanism was to drink more. Avoidance, that was my coping mechanism. And so I've had to sort of learn in sobriety, I've had to sort of learn how to deal with things as they come up. Um, maybe later in life than I should have. Uh, but I'm getting there.
One of the things I find really interesting too is it's naltrexone. Is that how you say it?
Naltrexone, yeah.
Naltrexone. Um, is also used for people with other addiction problems. How does it work for like gambling or something? Or what you said in your book that it's been effective in reducing gambling, reward based eating, and other behavioral addictions.
Yeah, so anything that really interacts with the opioid receptors in your brain, if you take it in a targeted way, it will reduce the pleasure that you get from certain activities. So if you take naltrexone and go gambling, and I'm not super familiar with the research on this, so I'm sort of speculating here. If you take naltrexone and you do something that is going to activate those systems and bring you pleasure, it's going to be less pleasurable, and that includes positive things as well. So, like, I wouldn't recommend taking naltrexone and then going to exercise or like have sex. It's not going to be as pleasurable as it would be without it, which is why taking it in this targeted approach. So, taking it every time that you drink, but only before you drink, I found that really useful because on days when I wasn't drinking, my reward system was still activated. So trying to develop positive habits and healthy behaviors. So things like exercise, good conversation, good food, having your endorphins, um, flooding your brain for other healthy behaviors, and so you sort of relearn how to live.
Is this kind of therapy gaining more traction? Because it's relatively unknown.
Yeah, it is relatively unknown, which is sort of odd because naltrexone has been FDA approved for the use of alcohol use disorder for over 30 years.
Wow.
It's been FDA approved for use of opioid disorder for even longer. So it's been around for a really long time, but it really hasn't caught on in the mainstream. This is changing. The particular way that I took it, the Sinclair method, there are some real barriers to uptake. So if you go to your doctor and you say to your doctor, I want to take this drug, but I want to do it in a way that allows me to continue to drink, your doctor might be resistant to that for completely understandable reasons. For one, it sounds crazy. It's, all of the message that we have received for 100 years almost have been, there's one path forward out of alcoholism, and that is complete and total abstinence. Clinicians have absorbed that message as well, and alcohol use and other substance use disorders really have historically not been taught in medical school. This is changing in part thanks to the opioid crisis.
Mm.
Things like medication assisted therapy, harm reduction are um, are catching on more within medicine. So this is changing sort of slowly, but the Sinclair method, this taking this pill in conjunction with drinking, because it's the protocol is so different from what doctors and clinicians are used to, there's real barriers there. There's also legal concerns. So if you go to your doctor and your doctor gives you essentially permission to drink alcohol, and then you go kill someone drunk driving, right? Your doctor doesn't want to be legally liable for that. So there are barriers. Where this is really catching on is online, is people finding information on Reddit, on Facebook, on YouTube, and sort of doing it themselves, using themselves as guinea pigs. That's one of the reasons I wrote this book, because I wasn't able to get information about this from my doctor. I was getting it from the internet, which is not a place where, normally if somebody says to go get your healthcare information from Facebook, I'd say you're crazy. But it actually did work for me. But I wanted a place that I wanted to write something that would collect all of the information in one place, because there are all sorts of tips and tricks that are going to um, make it more likely to work for people. And that wasn't hadn't really been collected in book form anywhere.
No, it's interesting. I think a lot of people are starting to look more and more towards the web skeptically in a way, but for information because the information is not out there in mainstream channels for many things, and
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to health.
No,
Um,
totally. My wife takes this sounds wacky, but my wife takes she has really bad allergies and she orders hookworms off of the internet and pays for it in crypto and it gets shipped to her from Australia in a little vial and she puts it on a Band-Aid and puts it on her arm and it has I'm not giving people medical advice. I'm not telling you to go inoculate yourself with hookworms, but this has been the only thing that has been effective for her. She's a nurse. She is fully on board with Western medicine, but she was kind of at her wit's end. We heard a show about this on Radiolab, a public radio show about this sort of therapy, and she decided to experiment. And she has been in basically in remission from very serious allergies for about 6 years now. This is not something her doctor was ever going to tell her.
No, no, not at all. What are good sources of information for people?
My book that would
Yeah.
be.
Okay.
So there are for people who are interested in this, I highly recommend joining Facebook groups. And there are some you got to be skeptical of kind of everything, and be skeptical of my book as well, right? I think people need to have a healthy degree of skepticism when anyone is proclaiming to be an expert in anything. So, but there are Facebook groups where people talk about their own experiences, and that was really helpful for me in terms of knowing what to expect, when to expect things to change, sort of following the protocols that other people had done before me. There are also coaches who do this for a living. And there are specific people I would recommend. Katie Lane is one. She's on YouTube. Claudia Christian, she's sort of the patron saint of the Sinclair Method. She was an actor who discovered this maybe 15, 16 years ago. And she did a TED talk about this. Actually, I guess longer than that, maybe 20, maybe more than that. She did a TED talk about this that's been viewed millions of times. And she's, I think, responsible more than anybody else for really spreading the word about the Sinclair Method. She runs a foundation called Options Saves Lives. And you can go to sources like that and you can find coaches who can help you through this process because there's all sorts of information that you won't get from, for instance, your doctor for the most part. Things like what to do about side effects, how long should it take, what do I do if I take the pill and I don't feel like drinking for a day, how do I form new habits. There's all sorts of things, and a lot of that is in my book, but I think that talking to other people who've gone through this as well, and you can do that on Facebook, or there are meetup groups specifically for the Sinclair Method where people get together on Zoom and they just talk about their experience and answer questions. And that way, it's really not unlike AA. There are peer support groups specifically for this. The difference is that through this method, you don't actually have to quit drinking. Drinking is a part of the solution.
What are some of the side effects associated with this?
Yeah, so it really depends on the person. Some people get no side effects. I did. I had some stomach upset, a little bit of headache. I felt tired. I felt really tired. Um, It's just not a it's I never liked the way that naltrexone made me feel, and there are ways to deal with the side effects. So, for instance, starting on a low dose, I started at 12 and a half. The standard dose is 50 milligrams. I started on 12 and a half milligrams and worked my way up over the course of weeks. Taking your pill with a full stomach and a full glass of water. Some people take over-the-counter anti-nausea medications. Some people microdose it before starting a full dose. So they'll take you basically take a pill, you distill it in you drop it 150 milligram pill in 50 milliliters of distilled water, and then you take a dropper, take 2 or 3 milliliters of that before bed. You can do that at night for several nights before you start actually taking the pill. You can get it from a compounding pharmacy, and the compounding pharmacy, it's basically a concentrated version of the drug itself, and so it cuts out a lot of the filler
Mhm.
ingredients that some people might be responding to. So there's all sorts of tips and tricks, and of course, I'm not a doctor. I can't give medical information, so the number one tip is really just to talk to your actual doctor about it.
You're the second person I've spoken to in about the last month um, regarding drinking.
Mm,
And the other person mentioned he'd stopped drinking totally. And he mentioned that he had to find replacement behaviors.
mm.
Talk about that a little bit because you talk about that in your book too.
Yeah, if you drink a lot and you quit drinking or you just drink a lot less, you're probably gonna find that you have a lot of hours in your day that you need to fill. And some people, there's a lot of people, this tends to be men, I'm a little jealous of them, who decide to fill those hours with weightlifting or running marathons or riding their bike 200 miles. That never really worked for me. Whatever that obsessive gene when it comes to exercise, I unfortunately didn't get that. So I found this is just probably sounds crazy to people, but I have found that the thing that, I really enjoy is working, and I'm lucky because I do what you do. I'm a podcaster and a writer, and I really enjoy my work. And so for me, it's easy for me to fill most of the hours of the day doing just the stuff that I get paid for. I also, I spend a lot more time outside now. I have a dog, so a lot of my free time is spent trying to make sure that my dog has the fullest life possible, which also means that I get to do the things that he likes to do, and so that's running, it's walking on the beach, it's swimming, it's paddleboarding, traveling, all of that stuff. So, it's you kinda gotta figure out what you like, and if you have been drinking for a good portion of your adult life, that can kinda be difficult. And sometimes you gotta start sort of at square one and think about what you like to do as a kid. Did you love playing soccer as a kid? Well, you join a soccer team, things like that. Um, yeah, or write a book about quitting drinking if you got if you got many spare hours in the day.
No, I think the idea, though, of going back to the things you enjoyed as a kid is really important for everybody because, my theory on life is we spend the first half of our lives having all these expectations and whatnot heaped upon us, and if we're lucky, we spend the second half peeling them back.
Mm, I
And
like
that
that.
goes and the idea of that goes back to being a kid. What did you enjoy when you were young? What were the things that really lit you up? And it's hard sometimes to go back in time and find those things.
Totally, totally, and a lot of the stuff that you do as a kid, when I was a kid, I loved to play, um, God, capture the flag with my friends. I don't know that I'm gonna find many 40-year-olds in my neighborhood who are up for a game of capture the flag at night, so you gotta kinda think outside the box, but maybe there's like a ninja gym in your town where you can sort of recreate those things, but in a more adult fashion.
What advice would you have for anybody looking at either their own drinking problem or the drinking problem of a loved one?
So my advice would be do your homework. The protocol that I wrote about in this book is one of many. We have I think many of us have absorbed the message that there's really only one path out of alcohol use disorder, and that's abstinence. That's usually with AA or other 12, rehab, AA, other 12-step programs. And it's just not true. When I was writing the book, I learned about some other modes of treating this problem that have gone out of fashion. Many of them because they didn't work.
Mm.
But I think people just realize that there's not one path out of this. There are many. Naltrexone in the Sinclair Method isn't going to work for everybody. It works really well for me, but it will not work for everybody. So I think people should be creative and do their research and just realize that if they've tried something and it hasn't worked, there are other modes out there.